Well, hello everyone, and welcome to an amazing event brought to you by Boston New Technology. The voice that you're hearing is a voice you're probably already quite familiar with, Steve Ilkus, co-director of Boston New Technology. But don't worry, you won't be hearing my voice for very long because I have with us today our head of community, Shirley, who's going to be interviewing our very good friend, Bryony Cooper, a woman of many different talents, experiences, who is doing wonderful things for the global startup ecosystem. So, with that, welcome everyone, and Shirley, it's your show.
Thank you so much, Steve. Originally from the United Kingdom, she took an impactful role in Bahrain, Middle East, promoting innovation and assisting in closing the gap, coming to us online today from Berlin. She started as a professional singer and became a serial entrepreneur, co-founded three tech startups before turning 30, and today she is a managing partner at Arkley Brinc VC. She has navigated the dynamic landscape of entrepreneurship with remarkable success. Today, we are building brilliancy with Bryony Cooper. Let's delve into Bryony's unique experiences, insights, and perspectives on entrepreneurship to learn about female founders' challenges and explore effective strategies for success. We will be discussing the gender gap and her commitment to supporting and mentoring other women in the field. Hello, Bryony. It's a pleasure to have you by the fireside today. How are you?
Hi, Shirley, and hi, Steve, and everyone else listening. I'm super well today, thank you. It's been a beautiful day here in Berlin, in Germany, and I've got a pretty good feeling about the beginning of this year.
Me too. Me too. Brianna, can you share with us your story and how you went from being a professional singer to where you are at today? How did your past experiences shape who you are and contributed to your success in the business world?
Sure. I guess you could say that my journey to where I am now has been fairly unconventional from a kind of startup and VC point of view. But I've always been very ambitious and tenacious since a young age. So when I was younger, just in my teenage years, I always really wanted to be a professional singer. And I got myself a manager and an agent and became self-employed as soon as I was 16 years old, alongside my studies. So, you could see already from a young age that I was kind of a go-getter.
Yes.
But yeah, along my studies, I actually sang professionally for 7 years into my early 20s, and I recorded 3 albums, and I used to gig every weekend and had, some success in that industry. But I always love new things and new experiences. So after a while, I started to get, slightly itchy, like wanting something new. So that's when I decided to move to London, to the big city, and I kind of fell upon the world of entrepreneurship. So my first job actually was working with SMEs, so small to medium enterprises, in a kind of networking and events community. And I don't know, the rest of the story over the last 15 years, I've just basically said yes to opportunities, and it led me to work in tech startups. So eventually in London, I met my co-founder. He was really the ideas guy, but I was very much a people person, so naturally gravitated to more managerial roles. And yeah, I set up my first business in London about 15 years ago, doing web development and search engine optimization. From that, my first startup was born, which was in the transportation field as a fleet management software as a service. And since then, I've run multiple companies. I've run an accelerator program and now eventually a venture capital fund. So I've really just been on this journey of early stage technology, particularly focused on fundraising.
And that's very inspiring, knowing that like you came from a not usual background and it led you to this journey. With we are going to deep into this today in our fireside chat, but it also shows that many people like you can go and become amazing leaders just like you. So you have worked in quite a few interesting locations around the world, United Kingdom and Poland, the Middle East, and Berlin. Can you talk about your experience? And also in particular, I would love for you to share your story from your entrepreneurial journey to the Middle East and how it shaped your approach to business.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, I consider myself so blessed to be able to have lived and worked in different places and seen the different cultures and had those life experiences. And I've got to say, it's been very different from city to city. So first of all, coming from London, of course, it's a huge city with so many people and so many businesses. So I kind of felt a bit like a drop in the ocean there. You know, it was quite difficult, I think, to find community. So the first change coming to Berlin, I found the startup ecosystem was a lot more accessible, just because it's, you know, it's still a big city, but the community is a bit tighter, and people were just a bit more open to kind of make introductions and invite me to events. And I very quickly managed to tap into other people that were very passionate about the same topics as me.
Yeah.
But you asked about going to the Middle East. So back in 2018, I spent almost 1 year in Bahrain in the Gulf region. And I went there with a company called Brinc with a C, which is a global accelerator program. They're headquartered in Hong Kong, so they actually have a lot of presence in Asia, but they also were in Europe and in the Middle East as well. So they invited me there to head up the new accelerator program for IoT and connected hardware. And that was super interesting because actually back then, the startup and the tech ecosystem was completely nascent. It was brand new. So there was a couple of brand new accelerators that had just got some local government funding, for example. But there's a lot of money in that part of the world. So there's a lot of potential for things like angel investment. But historically, they've been investing in, you know, bigger industries or in properties, you know, gas and oil, things like this. So this whole tech startup and IoT field was completely foreign. So yeah, I guess they needed to bring in some international experts who have been in startup ecosystems that have existed a bit longer. So it was really great to actually get to go over there and work with local Bahraini people and with other expats to actually start building and setting up this new startup ecosystem almost from scratch.
Right. I remember when we spoke before, you emphasized the fact that you were able to make a huge impact because you came from a place that already have the basics of entrepreneurship, and here, because it's a small ecosystem, you were able to actually become more of you and bring more from yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So of course, coming from the UK and in Germany, these are very large countries, and I would never get the opportunity to be invited to have a seat at the table where decisions are made, you know, nationwide at the end of the day. But in Bahrain, because it's such a tiny country, and again, because there were so few experts in this new field of business, I was invited to first of all participate in all of the events as a keynote speaker and get some really quick exposure there, which has bigger impact. But even the Economic Development Board, they had a program called Startup Bahrain where they invited me to come and actually sit down and brainstorm with them and ask questions like, you know, what can we do to improve legislation to make it more attractive for foreign entrepreneurs to come here and establish businesses? And I just thought that was such a great opportunity for someone, you know, of my age and my experience level to actually get a seat at that table and make some real hands-on impact.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. We all heard about the founder's journey as an emotional roller coaster, with lots of ups and downs, having to deal with multiple critical decision-making, reporting to VCs, responsibility to your employees and their families, and the business itself, of course. On the top of these challenges, female founders are facing more challenges. Having co-founded 3 tech startups yourself, what specific challenges did you face as a female founder in the tech industry?
I would say that these challenges have kind of changed a bit over time. When I first got into the startup world and I became a CEO of my first tech startup when I was just in my mid-20s, so I think it was actually very difficult to get people to take me seriously because, you know, I was a young woman. I was also a university dropout after 2 years of studying. I already was running my first business on the side. So I dropped out when we raised our first funding to come to Berlin. But I was always working in super male-dominated industries. So as I mentioned earlier, my first startup was in fleet management and transportation technology. So I was working with owners of private hire and taxi companies and software engineers, and was pretty much always the only woman in the room or the only woman, you know, like at a board meeting. So just I think getting my voice heard was difficult in those early days. By now, I've been for 15 years in the startup ecosystem. So I think I have enough of a track record and I've built enough of a name for myself that I can command a bit more respect. But, you know, when you're still somebody who's unheard of and, you know, a first-time founder trying to make your name, it's really difficult to get that. I think especially as a woman when you're surrounded only by men. And, you know, you do come up against subtle sexism. And unfortunately, there's a lot of unconscious bias. So people might not realize that they're biased, But, the number of times that when I was the CEO, I got mistaken for the secretary or asked to go and get the tea and coffee for the board members. And I'm just like, would you ask me that if I was a man? I don't think so.
So I'm wondering, how did you overcome these challenges? Like when you felt people mistaking you for not believing that you're the CEO, did you have to show that you are knowledgeable and you're capable of giving all these advice and suggestions?
Yeah. So I think on the one hand, it is pretty unfair that women often have to work, 3 times or 10 times harder than their male counterparts just to get the same level of respect. But it is important for any founder to completely immerse yourself in your field. So, when I was new to the world of tech startups, I lived and breathed it, and I made sure I integrated myself into the communities. I made sure I educated myself about all of the latest technology trends so that I could hold my own. So I had the confidence in myself because I knew that anytime I step up onto that stage or I step into a meeting and they're going to ask me questions about my business that I'm building, I can always answer the questions. And for me, that was one of the most gratifying things, actually, to really challenge the preconceptions that people might have about you and just prove them wrong. That's always a really great feeling, and that really helps to build your confidence.
I'm sure it is. In your experience, how can the industry better support and empower female entrepreneurs to overcome the unique challenges that you face? You already started by saying, learn and know what you do, which is really important.
Yeah. So I think one thing that's really important is finding people who believe in you and mentors. So when I first came to Germany, I didn't really know anyone else in this country or in the startup ecosystem. So I was very much out there by myself. And obviously you can not cut corners, but there's much quicker ways to learn if you actually have people supporting you who have been there and done that and can maybe help you avoid some of the pitfalls. So I personally volunteer a lot of my time to women entrepreneurs and to first-time founders, either one-to-one or through accelerator programs or incubators, for example, so that I can pass on the advice of I've been there, I've done that, I've done so many fundraising rounds, I've had so many co-founder disputes, or had to pick apart legal documents, which when you don't have experience in any of those things, it's a lot harder. So I think finding the right mentors and board advisors, for example, who can support you is a great way to do it. But then on the other hand, what can we do as venture capitalists or people that, are decision makers or holding the purse strings? We need to really put our money where our mouth is. Because I think female founders and women entrepreneurship is a big topic these days, and there's a lot of articles and meetups. But first of all, we need men also in the room, because it's no good if we're working in silos of just a really supportive group of women supporting each other, but not actually still being able to access the 85% of venture capital funds that are still controlled by men. So I think it's about not just paying lip service, not just talking about it, but actually doing something about it and making goals to actually invest into more women-led companies.
I agree. Thank you for saying that. Let's talk a little bit about imposter syndrome, that many entrepreneurs deal with it. Have you ever dealt with moments of self-doubt or imposter syndrome throughout your career? And how did you overcome it? And one trick to that, do you believe imposter syndrome is more common among women in the industry? And if so, why do you think this is?
Yeah. So absolutely, I have experienced feelings of imposter syndrome throughout my career. And I think maybe even more so than many other people, because I came from such a different background. Because I used to be a professional singer and then found myself as the CEO of a tech company. Of course, I probably wasn't the only one thinking, what the hell is she doing here? Is she qualified to be here? Does she know what she's doing? So of course I was telling, myself this in my head, as well as other people probably thinking it. And I do think it slightly disproportionately affects women, because women are just often very concerned about what people think of them, and also, are actually judged by a lot more unconscious bias than men. However, I've looked into some studies of this, and it does actually affect men quite a lot too. It's something like 65% of the men surveyed said that they had at some point felt imposter syndrome in the workplace. But with women, that number's even higher. It's kind of pushing towards 80%. But I think also women are maybe more willing to admit that they have it. But yeah, you do just often see men have this kind of innate confidence, whether it's earned or not, in many cases. Yeah, not everybody, of course. But I think often women are just a lot more worried what other people think about them. We have more of a tendency to want to be a people pleaser or to not upset anyone or ruffle any feathers. And also, of course, there's unfair opinions of women that come across as very strong and very assertive in a boardroom, for example, will be judged differently to a man who's assertive. So, yeah, it's not an even playing field, unfortunately. And I think that's why there is this imbalance. And what we really need to do is look at the causes and think about how can we make our workplaces more equitable, promote diversity and inclusion more, so there's enough representation of people, you know, women that you can look up to in managerial positions who are supporting you, which is, you know, it's really hard when you do have industries that are predominantly male, where you're always going to be the minority.
Right. So we have to start from the bottom, actually.
Yeah, I think, you know, really, if you are running a company, whether you're a man or a woman or whatever is your gender identity, I think you need to examine that and say, have we actually built an environment and a company culture that makes everybody feel welcome, that makes everybody feel heard, and where everybody has a platform to be able to bring their concerns without any fear of repercussions, and absolutely make sure that we don't have any kind of boys club, because, you know, people are naturally more likely to hire someone or to invest someone that they can relate to, who looks like them, who sounds like them, who maybe studied where they studied. And that's how you end up with these kind of lack of diversity.
Right. I agree. Do you, can we make this syndrome more of an advantage on our side?
It can be. I think a lot of it's about a matter of perspective. I also read a study about imposter syndrome that said actually people that identify as having feelings of imposter syndrome have actually shown to be better communicators, to be more empathetic, and to make better leaders, but perform exactly the same as people that don't have it. So actually, you know, there are definitely benefits, because of course, if you have these feelings, it means that you care. You actually do care about how you're perceived, and it means that you want to have the respect that you deserve. But it's about, you know, believing in yourself from the beginning. So I think there's a lot of things you can do. Like, for example, I'm a perfect example of how important transferable skills are. So it's not only about your academic background. It's not only about the years of professional experience that you've had, but, you know, you can have other soft skills, for example. Just for me, I think just being someone who's a good communicator and who's empathetic has got me really, really far in my career. And, you know, everything else you can learn as you go. So I think, you know, think about what are you good at? Maybe you grew up with a really tough sports coach and that made you very resilient. Or maybe you were moving around with your family all the time and it makes you very highly adaptable to new environments, right? Or maybe you had parents or siblings that were always fighting and you became a really good mediator and diplomat. There's all of these skills you just learn through existing in life that can be super valuable in the workplace. So don't only think about yourself as like, you know, what's my academic experience or what's my job title. Just think about, what am I good at? What unique skills do I have that I can bring to the table?
Right. What a beautiful response. I really like the fact that you were talking that actually it makes you work even harder and to be more professional, but on the outside people can't really tell of your lack of confidence, which is great. It is turn out on a good side, which is good. And being able to use your skills from other industries or like soft skills to bring it to different places is a very it's something that you need to learn how to transfer it to the other work. But it's everything that we do in our lives is building who we are. And we're able to do that using your skills to where you're at today. That's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, looking at having a singing career, for example, I was able to raise money on my first ever pitch because I already knew how to stand on a stage. I knew how to project my voice and make eye contact with people in the audience. And I'm sure I just was projecting a lot more confidence than, you know, some of the maybe more shy guys that come from a tech engineering background that have not really had any experience speaking to an audience.
Exactly.
You know, so immediately at the beginning of my tech startup career, that was already such a big bonus.
Right. So. Right, exactly. Wow, very impressive. Reflecting on your journey, please share with us a success story that stands out to you as particularly rewarding or fulfilling. What do you most enjoy doing?
So I would say two things. One from my own journey and one from women that I mentor, for example, because the two things I really enjoy the most about my career, one of them is I love getting up on stage. I love pitching and presenting and speaking, especially if I ever have a position to even inspire just one person that's listening, then that's really gratifying. And on the other side, again, because I'm such a people person, I love networking. I love going to events and meeting new people. And on the back of that, ending up mentoring other, especially women and first-time founders, as I said. So I think for me, one of the successes that I had was with my first startup. I mean, apart from raising some small pre-seed capital on the first ever pitch, we then went on to do a larger round of €500,000 with a very active fund in Germany called High Tech Gründerfonds. And this was very intimidating because they're very well known. It's like a larger kind of more corporate style feeling office. So of course, when I went to pitch in front of a boardroom full of 15 men in suits, it was a tough crowd. Like, honestly, at the beginning, they were sitting there with their arms crossed, nobody smiling, some people looking on their phones as if like, what's this girl doing here? Do we have to listen to this? And by the end of the pitch, I managed to get a standing ovation of these guys on their feet that were like, all in, where do I sign? So I was just really proud of myself that, if you're engaging enough and if you're passionate enough about what you're doing, and if you can convey that passion and get them to believe what it is that is your vision, then that's a really good feeling. So that was one standout moment in my earlier career. And on the other side, what's really gratifying is just anytime I see some success from somebody who I've helped in any way along their journey. And of course, I don't take any credit for their success. It's all on them. But just recently, I saw a young woman called Isabel Guernou, who's the CEO of a startup called The Blood, that's femtech or like tech for women, where you can actually take a small sample of blood from menstruation and send it off to a lab so that you don't need to go into a clinic, and it can capture all kinds of medical parameters. And when I first mentored her a couple of years ago, it was just an idea. She was just starting out, and we did some one-to-one mentoring sessions. And then I kind of lost touch with her. And just a few weeks ago, I went to a demo day where some startups were pitching. And there she was with a working prototype. And she's raised €1 million from the German version of Dragon's Den. So I was just like, yes, Isabel, look at this. And, she's done it completely on her own. But for me, it was just such a great feeling to think if I even played the tiniest role years ago or said one word that steered her in the right direction. So,
Wow.
I'm always just looking to see where the journeys of other women in the startup ecosystem are going. And I'm always rooting for them.
Wow. What a closure for you to put the seeds and to see where they grow. Beautiful. Today, you are a managing partner at venture capital at Arkley Brinc VC. Let's talk some numbers. Venture capital has historically been a male-dominated industry, with 95.5% of US VC firms reporting majority male decision makers. Another important data is only around 13% of venture capital dollars go to startups with a women on the founding team, and only 2% goes to femtech industry, a new technology that is specific to solving female problems such as medical health for females. What are the key challenges or barriers that contribute to the underrepresentation of women in founder roles and venture capital positions?
I think what I mentioned briefly earlier, the number one biggest problem, which is really difficult to measure, is the unconscious bias. So I'm spending a lot of time in the Berlin ecosystem, and here it is one of the most progressive countries, I think, that you can live in. And so there are a lot of opportunities for women. But the problem is that then a lot of the men in the ecosystem think that everything's fine here. They're like, we don't have a problem with equality. Like, it's easy. Like, women get just as much as men, right? But it's, of course not. They haven't actually lived our experience. And when you look at the statistics, like you just mentioned, the amount of venture capital that's being invested into women-led companies is still pitifully low. I mean, it stays at around 2% for like all women founded companies for the last 10 years or something. It's barely grown. And so I think people need to remember the difference between equality and equity when it comes to opportunities. We're not starting from the same level playing field. So actually women do need more resources and more effort to bring them up to until we get to an equal level, and we're still such a long way off. So I think, for anyone that's running a venture capital fund, it's really important for them to do the work and be more introspective and say, maybe I am biased without realizing it. So, I think they should actually, have incentives where they can have more opportunities to see more women pitch, but we also need to encourage more women to establish their own businesses. And I think there can also be, it can feel like there are so many resources for women because there are lots of events and communities, but the reality is it's actually still quite a small bubble. We're just a very loud bubble. So, if you're on LinkedIn or something and connected to a few people, you'll think, stuff for female founders is happening all the time, but it's still not being followed through, right? So, okay, you can go to a networking event, but then what? What happens next? So I think there needs to be more follow-up. And as I said earlier, investors need to put their money where their mouth is. And there are some great funds doing that. Like, for example, over here in Europe, there's Lenox Capital, run by a great young woman called Paulina Jensch. And I've done some talks on stage with her, where she's only investing in teams if they have at least 50% women founders or a female CEO. And they focus on impact technology as well. So I think there are starting to be more of these funds being launched, but there's still quite a long way to go.
Right. Wow. So you sort of answered that, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How can we address systematic issues or biases that may hinder women from entering and thriving in these roles?
I think one thing is we need to start early. So, it's no good only speaking to the women that are already founders and entrepreneurs. I think we need to go into the schools and the universities and plant the seeds, like we discussed already, to make women realize that this is an opportunity for them that they can take, and that they don't need to be necessarily from a STEM background. They don't necessarily have to have some technological based degree to be a qualified person to become a co-founder of a startup. So I think that's one important thing is, speaking to people in the earlier stages to inspire them and make them realize the possibilities that are available to them. Because, we can only start investing into more women-led companies when there are more women-led companies. So the statistics are not always completely representative, because, of course, if you look at all of the companies that are founded by women, the pool is still a lot smaller than male-founded companies. So I think that's one thing that we should do. But it's a really difficult question, Shirley, because there's so many studies already showing that when you have a woman at executive level or in the management board, the company performs better. Financially, they perform better. They get better returns annually. And even in the Stanford Business Review, they were published recently that if we close the gender funding gap, then it can increase the global GDP by 26% or $28 trillion. And if those numbers can't convince men that it's a good idea to put a woman on the management board, then I don't know what can.
We just need to repeat this over and over again.
Yes, just keep saying it a little louder for the people in the back.
Exactly.
I'm going to add something here, ladies.
Yeah,
just very quickly. So, Boston New Technology itself has actually been going through a lot of really welcome changes. And Bryony, as I'm sure you'll notice, the team is growing, and I want the team to be more representative of everything that we're talking about. And again, to your point, it isn't just because it's the right thing to do. It's because it's the smart thing to do. Because when you start bringing in more diversity, for example, our core principles of Boston New Technology are include, inspire, educate, and empower. When you start doing this, the work that you do and the progress that you see is, in my opinion, largely indicative of that diversity, because you're having all kinds of people from so many different incredible backgrounds with all their diverse experiences weighing in, and you're not having any more stagnation of the situation, siloed situations. So
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. I think that's great. And I think many more companies should actually take action when it comes to diversity and inclusion, because, again, a lot of them might pay lip service and say, oh, of course, it's a priority for us. But at the end of the day, when you actually look at the team, is there representation of people of color, of women, and does it go all the way up to the senior and executive level, not just, in the junior level? And there's one book that I mentioned in a recent talk that I did called Mind the Inclusion Gap. And it was written by Susie Levy, who was running diversity and inclusion for Accenture. So that's a huge company, obviously. And what this book actually gives managers and leaders is like more actionable steps of like, what can I actually do to implement diversity and inclusion within my company rather than just talk about it. And that book will also help them maybe challenge their own, unconscious bias that they might have that they didn't realize they have. So I recommend that managers actually do, take those steps. And if you're in a larger company, I think you have a responsibility as well to, run workshops or make the resources available for your team members as well, so that everyone is having access to that information.
Right. We will definitely put down the name so people can look at it after the live event. Thank you for that.
Yeah, afterwards I'll be happy to share a couple of links of the resources I've mentioned.
Wonderful. Thanks. So we started talking about specifically Boston New Technology. As the head of the Boston New Technology community, I would like to discuss with you what role mentorship, networking, and support systems play in encouraging more women to pursue and succeed in founder and venture capital roles. What strategies you find most effective in empowering women in the startup ecosystem?
That's a good question. So I know a few really great movers and shakers over here in Europe that are launching initiatives or communities for women founders. So one thing I want to reiterate that I said earlier is I think it's always really important to include men in the conversations and at the tables to make sure that we're not only working, in silos. But I think everything that's more interactive is more effective, because in my opinion, if you go, it's great to be seeing something educational. So if you go to a conference or an event and you're seeing women on stage who are inspirational, who you can look up to, sure, that's great. But I find what is more effective is when you actually get to do kind of small breakout sessions or one-to-one mentoring, where you can actually have a back and forth interaction and talk to women about what their personal challenges are, because everybody's story and everyone's journey is completely different. So I think just making sure that everyone at every level is included in the conversation is important. And here in Europe, there's a couple of great initiatives like Stephanie Von Bear is running a network called Founderland, which is an accelerator and community specifically for women of color. Because I think, when you look at how venture capital is invested, that's the group that receives the absolute least. So we basically need to give them more platforms and more opportunities where they can pitch, where they can be introduced to investors. And I mean, this is the way that I met Steve, actually, through a fellow friend or female co-founder she's a solo founder, actually. We need more people to be super connectors, to say, like, I'm not doing it to get anything out of it, because I really do believe what goes around comes around. So if you're just out there doing favors, not expecting anything in return, I think this fosters a really nice and welcoming ecosystem. So if you know that someone else could help someone else in their business, introduce them, ask what you can do for each other, and not what they can do for you, right? And I think that will just make a nicer world for everybody.
I agree with you. We also follow by the philosophy of pay it forward. You give what you can from what your knowledge, from your skills, and then the next person will give it to someone else.
Yeah, it really doesn't cost you anything. It leaves people with a good feeling. And, often it does turn into something actionable or something tangible that comes back around to you. But even if it gives you nothing else but a good feeling, it's still worth it.
Exactly. I was about to say that. At the end, the good feeling that you feel, the satisfaction, I think that's the biggest reward.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to aspiring female founders based on your experience in mentoring and supporting other women in the entrepreneurial space? What is the motto you go by? You already mentioned one.
Oh, was it I can't remember which one I told you. Was it Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down?
No. Is that what goes around comes around?
I love Weebles.
Yeah.
But they don't
So
fall.
can you say that the other one?
Okay. So the other one that I used to go by when I was a new startup founder there was in the 80s and 90s, there was a toy, I don't know if everyone knows it, called a Weeble. And it's kind of like an egg-shaped, like, little guy or doll with a weight in the bottom. So you can knock it over and it will always spring back up again. And so the slogan from their jingle on the advert was Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. And I used to tell myself this because as a startup founder, you need to learn to be so resilient. You are going to hear the word no so many times. You're going to get knockbacks. You're going to get rejections. And if you take it personally and give up too easily, then you're probably going to struggle to make it. So I think like that was my motto I used to live by in my earlier career. Just, always, if you get knocked down, you just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, but also do listen and take on board the feedback. Because I think some founders are a little bit too closed for coaching, for example, or they don't want to hear. But honestly, people don't have any benefit from just criticizing you for the sake of it. If somebody's giving you constructive criticism or feedback, listen to it, evaluate, decide if that makes sense for you, especially if 10 people are telling you the same thing, for sure, listen.
Right.
But don't let it stop you or deter you, because that's the whole startup methodology and mentality, right? Is you go back to the drawing board, you iterate, maybe you need to pivot, and then you try again. So that's another one. If at first you don't succeed, try and try again. It's the same kind of thing.
Yes. Thank you. Never give up, but listen to your advisors, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow, that was really inspiring, and I wanted to really, really, really thank you so much for this valuable talk. I'm looking forward to unrevealing more and more from your insightful journey. I'm sure we'll have you here again with us. I wanted to thank everybody who joined us here today, and it's also the recording will be on YouTube and on Eco's AI, our community platform. And I'm giving back the stage to Steve.
Are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure? Because honestly, you've done such a brilliant job that once again, I'm going to try to be very brief. Because apparently, even though I'm in my apartment right now, I'm in the middle of an active construction zone as well. So that's a lot of fun. But anyway, Bryony, it's been a pleasure having you with us. Shirley, phenomenal job. Boston New Technology community and all communities everywhere. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you
Thanks
so
a lot
much.
for having me.